You know that moment when someone says something to you that just breaks something inside, and you realize in real time that your life is about to split into a before and an after? I'm talking about the kind of thing that fundamentally changes how you see yourself, how you see the people around you, and what you're actually capable of doing when your back is against the wall. For me, that moment happened in front of 23 people on a Tuesday afternoon in Q3, and it came from someone I'd never thought would have that kind of power over me. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 46 years old. I've spent the last 9 years of my life at Prescott Consulting Group, a mid-sized management consulting firm in Columbus, Ohio. 9 years. That's not just a job. That's a third of my adult working life. That's tenure. That's the kind of place where people know your birthday and your kid's school, and that you always get a latte from the coffee station at 7:47 in the morning. When I started at Prescott, I was 37. I had already done the sales thing at 2 other places, and I was tired of the grind. I had a family. I had stability that mattered more than it used to. Prescott seemed like the kind of place where I could build something real, not just chase commissions, but actually develop client relationships that meant something. The VP of sales at the time, a guy named Richard Kellerman, he saw something in me. He told me in our first meeting, "Marcus, we don't win business here by being the loudest guys in the room. We win by being the guys our clients trust with their biggest problems." That stuck with me, and it turns out I was very good at it. Within 3 years, I had built a client portfolio that was generating somewhere around $2.8 million in annual revenue for the firm. Within 5 years, it was pushing $3.6 million. By year 9, this year, 2026, I was bringing in $4.3 million. That's not hyperbole. Those are real numbers from real contracts that I'd built and maintained and grown over nearly a decade. Here's what that meant in practical terms. Prescott Consulting's total annual revenue is approximately $7.6 million. That means I, one person, one sales guy, was responsible for 56.5% of the company's revenue. I was more than half. More than half. My clients weren't just account numbers to me. I knew them. I knew that Calvin Hargrove, the CEO of Hargrove Industrial, had a daughter who was applying to graduate schools. I sent him an email when she got into Northwestern. I knew that Jennifer Martinez at Berkshire Manufacturing was dealing with her mother's illness, and I made sure that when we were in her office for a quarterly strategy session, we kept it light and focused on wins rather than problems. I knew that Tom Russo at Commonwealth Supply had a passion for coaching youth baseball, and when Prescott was sponsoring a local business league, I made sure he knew about it. These weren't manipulative tactics. This wasn't me working the system. I genuinely cared about these people. That's not something most consultants will admit. It sounds soft, it sounds weak. But the truth is, when you care about someone's business, when you understand their challenges not just because it's in a binder, but because you've actually listened to them over years, they trust you with bigger problems. They come to you first. They fight harder to keep you in their corner. That's not manipulation. That's just human beings being human beings. The firm understood the value of what I did, or at least they acted like they did. Richard Kellerman paid me well. The partners would bring clients into my office to show them what our best-in-class relationship management looked like. I wasn't invisible. I was held up as an example of what Prescott did differently from bigger, more impersonal consulting firms. And I was happy. Not in some naive way, but genuinely. I liked the people I worked with. I liked my clients. I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I was making 6 figures. My wife, Jennifer, she didn't have to worry about money. My kids could go to decent schools. I was building something that felt sustainable. Then, 8 months ago, everything changed. The partners brought in a new VP of sales. His name was Derek Holton. He was 38 years old, MBA from Kellogg, and as far as I could tell, he had never actually carried a quota himself. His entire career had been internal to larger firms, managing sales operations, implementing CRM systems, designing what he called scalable sales infrastructure. He had the vocabulary of someone who had read a lot of business books and spent a lot of time in meetings about process optimization. He talked about CRM compliance scores and pipeline velocity metrics and the importance of standardized methodologies. The first time I met him was at the all hands when they introduced him. He stood up, all confidence and slides, and he talked about how Prescott was at an inflection point. He said we had tremendous individual talent. That was about me, though he didn't say my name. But we were limited by our lack of systematization. He said we needed to move from a collection of talented individuals to a true sales organization with repeatable processes. Sitting there listening to him, I thought, we're doing pretty well for our size, but this guy doesn't know our clients. He doesn't know how we actually win business. Derek started his first month by doing what he called a diagnostic. He met with each of us on the sales team individually. When he sat down with me, he had a folder. He wanted to talk about pipeline, about activity metrics, about compliance with the new CRM system he was installing. He asked me questions like, how many calls do you make per week? And what percentage of your pipeline is in stage 4 of the sales cycle? And how do you track follow-up activities? I answered his questions, honestly. I told him that I don't track my calls in any formal way, because most of my business comes from existing relationships. My clients call me more than I call them. I told him that my pipeline isn't really a pipeline, because I'm not doing high-volume prospecting. I'm deepening relationships with existing clients and occasionally getting a referral. I told him that my CRM entries are basic, because the system isn't designed for the kind of relationship-based selling that I do. He nodded while I was talking, but I could see something in his eyes. Skepticism. Judgment. Like I was describing a broken system, not describing what actually worked. After that meeting, Derek rolled out the Prescott Sales Excellence Framework, a 5-step process designed for high-volume, shorter-cycle selling. Everyone had to document everything in the CRM, submit weekly pipeline reports. The problem? It was built for closing 20 small deals, not for deepening key relationships. It was the wrong tool for what I actually did. I started trying to fit myself into Derek's framework anyway. I logged into the CRM. I started entering activities. I submitted the pipeline reports. But it felt like I was building a house for the wrong climate, and it was taking time away from actually doing the work, actually being with my clients. Derek noticed. Of course he did. About 2 months in, he brought me into his office. He had a printed report. It showed my CRM compliance score. It was 64%. He told me that the firm average was 82% and that anything under 70 was considered at risk. He said, Marcus, I'm trying to build a culture of discipline here. I need you to understand how important it is that we document everything we do. I told him, Derek, I understand the value of CRM, but my business model doesn't lend itself to high-frequency logging. My clients are on the phone with me. They have questions. I solve them. I'm not running a high-velocity pipeline. He said, that might be true today, but if we're going to scale, if we're going to build this firm, we need to move away from individual relationships and toward processes that are repeatable and transferable. And there it was. That was the moment I understood that Derek didn't see what I was doing as valuable. He saw it as a liability. He saw me as someone who was hoarding relationships instead of building systems. He saw me as someone who was, in his mind, inefficient. I should have seen what was coming, but I didn't want to believe it. I'd been at Prescott 9 years, brought in more than half the revenue, so I kept working. In Q2, I brought an $875,000 Berkshire expansion deal and Carlisle Freight at $875,000 over 2 years. I was crushing my numbers in real terms. Derek was documenting everything. Missed CRM entries, skipped pipeline reviews, my resistance to his methodology. I found out later he'd been building a formal file against me, a legal case without me fully understanding it. The night before the Q3 all-hands sales review, I remember sitting at home with Jennifer. We were in the kitchen. She was doing something at the counter, and I was going through emails on my laptop. I was, I think, trying not to think too much about the meeting the next day. You ready for the big presentation? She asked. I told her yes, that we'd be reviewing Q3 results and probably talking about some of Derek's new initiatives. What I didn't tell her was that I had a bad feeling. I didn't tell her that I'd been at Prescott long enough to know when something was shifting in the air, and that something felt wrong. I didn't tell her that Derek had been increasingly cold to me in the halls, increasingly making pointed comments in meetings about the importance of process adherence. You're going to be fine, she said. You always are. And I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The Q3 all-hands meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was held in the large conference room on the 3rd floor of our building, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Broad Street, the one with the big mahogany table and the leather chairs that the partners used for client presentations. All of us from the sales team were there. So were the partners, Richard, who had hired me all those years ago, and the other two founding partners, Patricia Chen and Elliot Marsh. Derek was there too, of course. He had the whiteboard. He had printed reports. He had that look on his face that I was starting to recognize. The look of someone who had prepared something he thought was going to change the way people saw the world, or at least the way they saw one person. The room was cold, air conditioning probably, but colder than usual. The light came through the windows at an angle that made everyone's faces look harder. Or maybe I was primed to see everything as a threat by then. We went through the numbers first. Q3 had been strong overall. The firm had brought in $1.98 million in new and expanded business. Derek presented charts showing where that business came from. He had metrics on close rates by sales rep, activity levels, pipeline velocity. He was very professional about it. He moved through his slides with the kind of practiced ease that comes from having given this presentation many times before, probably for other firms that had hired him to come in and straighten out their messy, relationship-driven sales organizations. I was prepared to hear my name come up. I was prepared to be recognized for bringing in about $1.3 million of that $1.98 million in new business. I was prepared for that at least. I had told myself that even if Derek resented me, even if he thought I was resistant to change, the partners would have my back. The numbers were real. The revenue was real. You don't humiliate someone for bringing in 56% of your firm's revenue, not in front of the whole team, not publicly. That made no sense. I was wrong about that. What I wasn't prepared for was what happened next. Derek stood up from the table. He walked to the whiteboard. His movements were deliberate. He was taking his time. He looked directly at me and he said, "Marcus, I want to talk about performance standards." My stomach dropped. It literally felt like something inside me fell down several floors at once. He started talking about activity metrics. He put numbers up on the board. He talked about pipeline discipline. He talked about process adherence. He had numbers showing my CRM compliance score, showing how many pipeline review meetings I'd skipped, showing comparisons between my activity levels and the firm average. And then he said, "Marcus, I'm going to say something hard. By every measurable standard we hold this team to, activity metrics, CRM discipline, process adherence, you are a failure." The word hung in the air, failure. Not struggling with the new system, not needs to adjust his approach, failure. I looked around the room. Nobody was moving. Patricia was staring at the table, her hand wrapped around a coffee cup like it was a life raft. Elliot had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes when you're actively working to keep from reacting. Richard was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something there, apology maybe, or regret, but also something else, something that looked like surrender. Derek kept talking. He said something about how I was a liability to the firm's growth. He said something about how relationships couldn't scale, and that Prescott needed to move past individual heroics. He pulled up another slide showing that without significant changes in my process adherence, he didn't think I could continue in my current role. I don't remember the exact words. My ears were ringing. It was like I was underwater, and Derek was talking to me from somewhere above the surface, and I could hear the sound, but not the actual meaning anymore. What I remember is the feeling of being publicly humiliated in front of your entire team by someone you'd known for 8 months. The feeling of realizing that the partners, the people who had hired you and paid you and told you for 9 years that you were doing good work, were sitting silently while this happened. The feeling of understanding that silence was a choice. They were choosing to let this happen. They were choosing not to defend me. And I remember the moment of absolute clarity. I understood in that moment that my time at Prescott was over. It wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't something I needed to debate with myself or worry about or try to fix. It was done. The only question now was whether I was going to sit there and wait for them to fire me, or whether I was going to leave on my own terms. I sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably 5 seconds. Derek was still talking, but I had stopped listening. My mind had moved somewhere else, to a kind of functional numbness. I could see Patricia out of the corner of my eye. She still wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her coffee cup like there were answers written on the inside of it. Richard's jaw was tight. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. Then Derek said something about needing to talk about next steps, and my brain snapped back into the room. Next steps. That meant they were going to fire me, right now, in this meeting, in front of everyone. That's how you do it when you want to humiliate someone. You don't give them privacy or dignity. You do it in front of their peers. You make it public so that everyone understands that this person has failed. Except they didn't. Or rather, Derek didn't explicitly. He said something like, "I think we need to have a conversation with HR." And then he sat down and started talking about the rest of the team's performance. Like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of the room. Like he hadn't just told me, in front of 23 people, that I was a failure. We sat through another 30 minutes of metrics and charts. I don't remember any of it. My hands were very still on the table. Like if I moved them, someone might think I was about to do something. My breathing had gotten shallow. Everyone in the room was trying very hard not to look at me directly, except for occasional quick glances. I could feel those glances, like pinpricks. When the meeting ended, and I don't remember whether Derek formally dismissed us, or if we just kind of dissolved, I stood up and walked out without saying anything. I didn't wait for a conversation with Derek. I didn't wait for HR. I didn't make eye contact with anyone, not even Richard. I just left. I walked out of that conference room and down the hallway like I was moving through a normal Tuesday, not like my entire life was breaking apart. I went back to my office. It's a small corner space on the second floor, nothing fancy, but it's had my stuff in it for 9 years. Some framed photos of my family on the desk, Jennifer and the kids, a picture from Emma's high school graduation, a photo of my son Daniel from a few years ago, an Ansel Adams print I've always liked, a black and white photograph of Yosemite in winter, a few books on shelves, mostly business books but also some fiction that I actually read, a stack of thank you notes from clients over the years, thrown into a drawer rather than filed carefully. The tangible evidence of a life that I had built in that space, in this firm, over nearly a decade. I looked at it all for a moment, and I thought about the different paths ahead of me. I thought about pretending this hadn't happened. I thought about the idea of calling Richard later and having a conversation, maybe getting HR involved to make sure this was handled properly, maybe even hiring a lawyer and pushing back, letting everyone know that what Derek had done was completely inappropriate. I thought about the lawyer thoughts that everyone thinks when they realize they're about to be fired. Do I have a case? Should I push back? What's my severance package going to be? Are they going to have to pay me out for the rest of my contract? But then I replayed Derek's accusation in my mind. 9 years of bringing in more than half the firm's revenue, and now I was a failure because I wasn't filling out CRM forms the right way. Richard's silence, Patricia's refusal to look at me, all those people who claimed to value me, who'd put me on a pedestal, who'd profited directly from my work, they had let this happen. I thought about staying at Prescott as a wounded person, waiting to see if they'd fire me or try to rehabilitate me. But the message that would send to my clients would be poison. That I was still here, that nothing had changed, except that I'd been publicly humiliated by my own firm. That message would be poison. My clients would see that I had allowed myself to be humiliated, and they would question whether I had any power left, any leverage, any ability to actually help them. I couldn't do it. I got a cardboard box from the supply closet down the hall. It was the kind of box that reams of paper come in. Sturdy, brown, completely impersonal. I came back to my office and I started taking things off the desk. The photos of my family, Jennifer and the kids, Emma's graduation, Daniel from a few years back, the Anselm Adams print, the stack of client thank you notes, a coffee mug that one of my longest-term clients had given me a few years ago, a custom thing with the Hargrove Industrial logo on it. That mug probably weighed as much as everything else combined, but I wanted it. My hands were shaking, but not from anger or fear. I wasn't angry, which surprised me. I was moving through the world watching myself from outside, like someone else was packing the box. The autopilot was handling the logistics. It took maybe 10 minutes. I wasn't trying to make a grand gesture or anything. I wasn't doing it for anyone else to see. There was nobody watching me pack that box. Nobody was gathering in the hallway to see if I was really going to do this. I was just clearing out what was mine, putting it into a box, getting ready to walk out. When the box was full, I looked around the office one more time, at the desk, at the chair, at the bookshelves, at the window that looked out over the parking lot, at all these small pieces of a life that I had lived here, in this space, for 9 years. I thought about the morning meetings at this desk, the client calls, the moments when a deal would close and I would feel that hit of satisfaction. I thought about the people I'd worked with who were good and kind and competent. I thought about the clients who had trusted me. I thought about the time I'd spent here building something. And then I picked up the box and I walked out of my office. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I passed Janet in reception and saw her eyes widen as she realized what was happening. I just walked past the desk, down 3 flights to the ground floor. My car was a 4-year-old Acura, reliable and forgettable. I put the box in the back seat and sat for a moment. This is where everything changes, I thought. I drove home. It was 2:45 on a Tuesday, leaving at the wrong time of day after 9 years of leaving at 6 or 7 at night. When I pulled into the driveway, Jennifer was at work. The house was empty and quiet. I carried the box inside and I set it on the kitchen counter, and then I sat down at the kitchen table and didn't move for maybe 20 minutes. My mind kept cycling back to that moment when Derek said the word, failure. I replayed the room going quiet, Patricia looking at her coffee cup, Richard's unreadable expression. I kept asking myself if I'd made the right choice or made things worse. But underneath all of that was something else, a kind of clarity, a sense that this was right, even if it was scary, a sense that staying would have been the wrong move, that trying to salvage the relationship would have been a mistake, that the only real choice I'd had was the one I'd made. When Jennifer came home around 5:30, she could see immediately that something was wrong. She'd been married to me for 16 years and can read my face like other people read books. "What happened?" she asked, knowing something significant had shifted. I told her what happened. I laid out the whole thing. Derek's public accusation, the word failure hanging in that conference room, the way the partners had said nothing, the way I had gone back to my office and packed a box and walked out. I told her that I had gotten up and walked out without waiting for the conversation with HR. I told her that I wasn't going back. She stared at me. "So you quit?" "No," I said. "I didn't technically quit, but I'm not going back." She sat down and asked about HR, severance, logistics. I told her I didn't know yet. "Okay," she said, "we'll figure it out." She didn't ask if I was sure or if I'd made a mistake. She didn't panic about money or mortgages. She just said we'd navigate this together. That night I called Richard. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I sent an email instead, something professional, something that said I had decided to leave Prescott Consulting Group effective immediately, and that I would like to discuss the transition with him when he had time. I kept my tone professional, someone making a calculated business decision, not someone who'd been kicked out. He called back about an hour later, his voice careful. "Marcus, I'm sorry about what happened today." "Are you?" I asked. There was a pause. "Look, Derek got out of hand," he said, "but I'm hoping we can work through this. I'm hoping you won't make any rash decisions." I told him that I had already made the decision. I told him I was gone. Not angry, just clear, just stating a fact. He tried to talk me out of it. He offered to discuss my role, the way forward, Derek's overly aggressive approach. He said the firm valued me, understood what I'd built, that it wasn't the end. Mistakes had been made but could be fixed. Derek's style wasn't for everyone, but I could hear what he wasn't saying, in the gaps between his words. They had let Derek call me a failure in front of the whole team, and none of them had stood up and said, "That's not acceptable." They had sat in silence. That told me everything I needed to know about how much they actually valued me. If I really mattered, if I really was as important as they'd been telling me for 9 years, they would have defended me. The fact that they hadn't meant that the valuation they'd given me had never been real. Or it had been real until Derek arrived and offered them a different story. A story about systematization and growth and moving past individual heroics. I told Richard that I appreciated the offer, but that I was done. I told him I would work with HR on the logistics of separation, but that I wouldn't be coming back to Prescott Consulting. I told him that his silence in that meeting had broken something that couldn't be fixed with a better title or a conversation. I hung up the phone. The 3 days that followed were strange. I didn't sleep much. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my mind running, thinking about money, about what comes next, about the weird liminal space of being unemployed when you've been the same person in the same place for 9 years, about what it meant that I'd walked out, about whether I'd made a terrible mistake. But during the day there was something else. There was a kind of clarity that felt almost like relief. Wednesday I met with Susan from HR, a woman I'd always liked. We met in the Prescott office. Awkward after leaving with a box less than 24 hours earlier. She explained the severance, a month's salary, health insurance for another month. It wasn't generous, but enough to buy time. We didn't talk about what happened. Susan was professional, but her discomfort made clear that everyone knew Derek had been out of line. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Thursday, I reached out to my clients with a simple email. "I've decided to leave Prescott, effective immediately. I want to continue supporting your organization. I'm available to discuss how we might structure that. I sent it to my 8 major clients. By end of Thursday, 6 had responded. Most confused at first, but then clear. They wanted to work with me directly. Tom Russo at Commonwealth Supply said he'd been having problems with Prescott for months and preferred working directly with me. The relationship had been with me, not with the firm. That gave me a hit of something positive. The sense that maybe this wasn't the end of the world. Maybe there was another side to this. Maybe the clients did care about me, not just about Prescott. Maybe the relationships I'd built actually mattered in the way I thought they did. Friday passed in a blur. I cleaned the garage, went to the grocery store, applied for a few jobs out of reflex. I was in a holding pattern, waiting for something, without knowing what. Monday morning I was at the kitchen table with coffee when the phone rang. The number was blocked. Something made me pick up. Hello? Marcus? The voice was deep, calm, and immediately familiar. It's Calvin Hargrove. For a moment I didn't say anything. I was trying to understand how he'd gotten my number, and also I was trying to understand the voice in my head that was suddenly very loud and telling me that this call meant something, that this call was important. Calvin Hargrove. Calvin Hargrove, who ran Hargrove Industrial, the company that had generated $1.9 million of my annual revenue at Prescott. Calvin Hargrove, whose daughter I'd congratulated on getting into Northwestern. Calvin Hargrove, who I'd had dinner with multiple times over the years, who I'd spent 9 years building a relationship with. Calvin, I said. Hi, how did you get this number? I have my ways, he said, and I could hear him smiling. Look, I'm going to be direct. Your email bounced this morning. I tried the main Prescott number and got routed to someone named Derek, who told me you no longer work there. What's going on? I told him. I laid out the whole thing. Derek's arrival 8 months ago, the escalating tension over the CRM and the methodology, the documentation he'd been building against me, the public accusation in the quarterly review, the walkout. I told him that I had decided I couldn't work there anymore after that. I told him that I had reached out to my clients, including him, to let them know I was available for ongoing work. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "So you're independent now?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm figuring it out. I've got some time to think about the next move." "What are you thinking?" he asked. "Honestly, I haven't gotten that far. This all happened last Tuesday. I'm still processing it. I'm still trying to understand whether I made the right call or whether I just sabotaged my own career." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could picture Calvin in his office. He always took calls sitting in the big leather chair by the window that overlooked downtown Columbus. He was probably staring out at the city while he was thinking, the way he always did when he had something important to figure out. He'd done that in meetings with me, multiple times, leaning back in that chair with his eyes on the skyline while he worked through a problem. Calvin had hired Prescott 9 years ago, after growing frustrated with a bigger consulting company where relationships became impersonal and nothing stuck. Richard brought me to the first meeting because he thought my personality would connect with Calvin. He was right. Calvin was self-made, understood relationship-based business. Over the years, I deepened that relationship, attended board meetings, understood his expansion strategy, advised on acquisitions and financing. I knew his family, his daughter's social justice work, how he'd taken time off when his wife was ill. The relationship with Calvin wasn't transactional. It wasn't me checking a box and maintaining an account. It was real. We had had real conversations. We had laughed together. We had had honest moments where he told me he was worried about the direction of the business, or where I'd given him my opinion, even when I knew he wouldn't like hearing it. And now he was calling me on a blocked number because his email to my work address had bounced. "Marcus," he said finally, "Hargrove Industrial has $1.9 million a year in consulting work with Prescott, but that's just because that's the structure we've been in. The truth is that money is coming to you. You're who we trust. You're who understands our business. Derek Holton called me last week trying to do a relationship transition, trying to convince me that he could provide the same level of service I was getting from you. He wanted to come see me, wanted to talk about the work, wanted to introduce himself as my new point of contact at Prescott." "What did you tell him?" I asked. I told him that relationships can't be transitioned through a phone call and a CRM handoff. I told him I appreciated what Prescott had done for us, but that we were looking for something that wasn't going to be available in that organization anymore. I didn't mention you, but he understood what I meant. I didn't say anything. I'm telling you this, Calvin continued, because I want to make you an offer. I want Hargrove Industrial to hire you as a direct consultant. We can structure it however makes sense. Retainer basis, project basis, equity stake if you want to go that direction. But I want you working for me, not for Prescott, for me, for Hargrove. I want the company that's paying the money to know exactly who they're paying, and I want that person to be you. Calvin, that's a significant offer, but I need to understand the legal implications, the non-competes. I need to make sure we can do this defensibly. Fair enough, he said. Take 24 hours. Look at your contract. Talk to a lawyer if you need to. Then call me back. But Marcus, I want you to understand something. Hargrove Industrial is going where you go. That's how much we value what you do. If Prescott is going to lose the contract because you leave, then we need to find a way to work with you directly. I'm not threatening to leave Prescott. I'm telling you that your relationship with us is more valuable than Prescott's infrastructure. And if we have to choose, we're choosing you. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. It wasn't the shaking from last Tuesday. That was adrenaline and numbness and the shock of the moment. This was different. This was the shaking that comes from understanding that something you thought was broken might actually be salvageable. That the thing you'd been worried about, that you'd been making a terrible mistake, might actually be an opportunity. I found my original Prescott contract and read the non-compete clause carefully. The key word was solicit, actively recruiting clients. Soliciting meant calling them and convincing them to leave. But Hargrove was coming to me, making their own choice. The contract didn't protect Prescott from their clients following me elsewhere. Still, I needed a lawyer's perspective. Tuesday morning, I called a lawyer I knew, a contract lawyer named Paul Hendricks, who'd done some work for Jennifer's clinic. I'd met him a couple of times at clinic events. He seemed sharp, competent, the kind of person who would give you a straight answer instead of just telling you what he thought you wanted to hear. I explained the situation to Paul. Hargrove had come to me, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't violating the non-compete. Paul asked clarifying questions about the contract, said he'd review it by lunch. When he called back, he said, Prescott had a legitimate non-compete, but the risk was low. Hargrove had come to me, not the other way around. The contract didn't protect Prescott from their own clients following me elsewhere. The real risk, he said, isn't legal. It's that Prescott might get angry and try to intimidate you. But if a major client wants to hire you directly, that's not a problem. That's a solution. That afternoon, I called Calvin back. I'm in, I told him. He didn't make me repeat it. Good. Here's what I'm thinking. We hire you as a consultant at a retainer rate of $120,000 a month. Plus, you get 5% equity in Hargrove Industrial. You get an office space in our building, or you can work remote, your choice. You have health care through our plan. You're a consultant, not an employee, so you maintain your independence. But you're part of the team. How does that sound? $120,000 a month was $1.44 million a year. That was more than I was making at Prescott, where my total compensation was around $350,000 in base salary and commission. The commission was variable. It depended on how many deals I closed, how big they were. Some years it was higher, some years lower. But the base was stable. At Calvin's offer, I would be losing the commission structure. No more variable income based on deals closed. But I would have a guaranteed base, plus equity upside if Hargrove continued to grow. Hargrove was already a profitable company doing over $50 million in annual revenue. 5% of that, even just the profit portion, could be worth something real over time. It sounds good, I said. When would you want me to start? I'll have our HR person contact you tomorrow with the paperwork. We can move fast. You could be starting next Monday if you want. I said yes. What happened in the weeks that followed was both expected and surprising. First, the expected part. Prescott found out what I was doing. Derek apparently discovered it when Jennifer Martinez at Berkshire Manufacturing, who was one of my major clients and who had called me asking how she could hire me directly, told Derek that she was planning to hire Marcus as a consultant and that she was ending her relationship with Prescott. Derek called me furious, asking if I was actively soliciting Prescott clients in violation of my non-compete. I stayed calm. I told him that Berkshire Manufacturing had come to me, that I had not solicited them. I told him that was the distinction in the contract. He told me that Prescott was going to have their lawyers look at it and get back to me. He said it like a threat. He said I should be prepared for legal action. I told him I'd be happy to discuss it with Prescott's lawyers if they wanted to contact me. Prescott's lawyers never actually contacted me. I think they knew they didn't have a case, and I also think that Richard probably told them to back off. But the anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. I could feel it in Derek's voice. I could see it in the responses I got when other clients called Prescott to transition their relationships. The surprising part was what happened to Prescott after that. 4 days after I started at Hargrove Industrial, Calvin called me. He was laughing. Actually laughing, which I had never really heard from him before. He usually had a more measured approach to things, a kind of gravitas that came with being a CEO, but now he was laughing. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Prescott's revenue for this quarter is down to $3.4 million. They're projecting that without you, without Hargrove, without the other clients who have either left or indicated they're leaving, they're going to drop to around $4 million annual revenue for next year. They've cut themselves in half." Hearing that didn't make me feel triumphant or satisfied. It made me feel sad. Sad for Richard, who had been good to me and who clearly hadn't understood what was going to happen when Derek arrived. Sad for Prescott, which had been a decent place to work and which was about to implode because of one bad hire and some poor leadership decisions. And that's the thing about a consulting business, right? It's not like running a product company where you have recurring revenue and infrastructure that continues to generate money, even if key people leave. A consulting business is built on relationships, and when the person who carries those relationships leaves, the relationships leave with them. Derek's process improvements in CRM discipline and standardized methodology couldn't replace that. You can't systemize trust. You can't put relationship building into a 5-step sales process and expect it to work the same way. The clients didn't care about Prescott's systems. They cared about me. They cared about the person who understood their business, who showed up for them, who had earned their trust over years of consistency and genuine care. By Q4, Tom Russo had moved his Commonwealth supply contract to me. That was another $680,000 a year. By the beginning of 2027, I had brought $3.2 million of Prescott's original client base to my new consulting practice. 3 of my 8 major clients had formally hired me directly. 3 others were in conversation about it. The remaining 2 stayed with Prescott, but that was fine. Not everyone needed to come with me. I set up officially as Web Consulting Group in February 2027. I hired 2 consultants to help me service the clients. Good people, people who understood the kind of work we did. We took office space in the Riverside district, nice space with windows and natural light, and a conference room where I could meet with clients. I still worked from home 2 days a week, but I had a place to work from and a team to work with. Meanwhile, Prescott was in crisis mode. The partners realized too late that Derek had blown up their business. By the spring, Richard called me. This was about 4 months after my departure. He wanted to know if there was any way to salvage the relationship, if I had any interest in coming back. I told him no. I told him that what had happened in that meeting, and more importantly, what had happened in the silence after that meeting, had broken something. Trust. You can't rebuild that by offering someone a better title or a higher salary. "We made a mistake," Richard said. He actually sounded sincere. His voice had the weight of someone who had spent months thinking about what he'd done wrong. Derek got ahead of himself. "We didn't advocate for you the way we should have." "No," I said. "You didn't." There was a pause. "For what it's worth, Derek is gone. We let him go in March. We realized that he didn't understand the business and that he damaged our most important relationship. I didn't feel satisfaction at that. I didn't feel anything particular. Derek had done what Derek thought he needed to do. Impose order, systematize, bring the firm into the modern era. He was following a framework that he'd probably used at multiple firms before. He probably believed in it. He just didn't understand what the cost of that would be. And the partners, by not protecting their people, had let it happen. By the end of 2027, Web Consulting was on track to do $3.8 million in annual revenue. We were smaller than Prescott, but we were profitable, and we had something Prescott had lost: the trust of our clients. I was making more money, I had an ownership stake in something real, and I got to work the way I believed in working. Jennifer never said I told you so about any of it. When I got the contract with Hargrove, when the other clients started coming over, when we realized that I was actually going to be fine, actually going to be more than fine, she just smiled and said, "I knew you would be." When you hit bottom and bounce back, it shifts your perspective. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Derek, not at Richard, not at Prescott. I understood that Derek had been trying to do what he thought was right, trying to build something modern and scalable. I understood that Richard had been in a difficult position, caught between a new VP with big ideas and a veteran sales guy with proven results, but no apparent desire to change. But what I also understood was this: you can build a business on systems and process and efficiency, but you can't build it on that alone. You have to have people who care, who show up, who build real relationships. And when you have someone like that, when you have someone who brings in more than half your revenue, you protect them, you advocate for them, you stand up for them in meetings, even when the new guy with the MBA is telling you that they're the problem. I saw Richard once, about a year and a half after I left, at some kind of Columbus business event. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. He asked me how things were going. I told him they were good. He told me that Prescott had stabilized. They'd brought in a new VP of sales who actually understood relationship-based selling, and they were rebuilding. He said they were doing around $5.6 million in revenue, about where they'd been before Derek arrived, but still down from the peak. He asked me if I ever thought about the road not taken, whether I wished I'd stayed and fought it out rather than leaving. I told him the truth. No, leaving was the best decision I could have made. Not because of the money, though the money is good. Because sometimes you have to know when a place doesn't deserve you anymore. And Prescott stopped deserving me the moment nobody stood up to defend me. He just nodded. What I didn't tell him was that I thought about that meeting sometimes. That moment when Derek said the word failure, when all those faces turned away from me. I didn't tell him that there was something about going through that, about standing up and walking out, about finding out that I had the strength to do it. There was something that changed in me. I'm 47 now. Web consulting is 2 years old. I have good clients, good people working with me, and more autonomy than I had in 9 years at Prescott. My family is fine. My wife is proud of me. My kids, who are old enough to understand what happened, understand that sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from something that looks good on the surface, but stops being good underneath. The truth about those moments, the ones where your life splits into a before and an after, is that they're not usually as heroic as you think they'll be when you're imagining them. There's no triumphant music. There's no crowd cheering. There's just you, sitting at your desk with a cardboard box, understanding that the only thing you control is how you respond. I walked out of that meeting. That was all I did. And that single decision to stand up and leave, rather than sit down and negotiate, set off a chain reaction that led me to a better place. I didn't know that would happen when I packed that box. I just knew I couldn't stay.